This episode is brought to you by the International Jacques Ellul Society. If today's conversation has you thinking about the way we speak, listen, and make meaning together, you might want to check out their 2026 conference. It's called The Humiliated Word in a Time of Crisis, and it's happening July 14th through 16th at St. Mary's College, Notre Dame, Indiana. Scholars, theologians, and anyone for whom words matter and dialogue is central are gathering to explore what it looks like to take language seriously in a noisy, polarized world. It's the kind of gathering where the conversations in the hallways are just as good as the ones on stage. And if that sounds like your kind of people, head over to ellul.org to learn more and register. Welcome back to Personalist Manifestos. My name is Michael Morelli, and I'm the host of this ongoing conversation about contemplative revolution. In this episode, I'm joined by two theologians who are asking important questions about technology, including artificial intelligence. Their names are Noreen Herzfeld and Benjamin Chicka. You'll get to know them as our conversation unfolds, but a little context first. This is actually a follow-up to a previous conversation. The last time the three of us got together publicly was at Theology Beer Camp, and the response was overwhelming. There were so many questions we simply couldn't get to them all. So we booked a second conversation to finish what we started. And this is that conversation. And so with that, here's my conversation with Noreen and Ben. All right, so welcome to Personalist Manifestos. I have Noreen Herzfeld and Ben Chicka joining me. It's really wonderful to have both of you. It's been a while since I've seen you. How are things going today?
It's a rainy day here in Boston, so I'm looking for some energy out of the podcast.
Okay. I'll do my best to bring some energy. It's also rainy here, which is pretty common for the Canadian Pacific Northwest, so I find ways to be positive even though it can be very gloomy.
No, we've got very bright sunshine, which I'm somehow trying to not be in the middle of right here.
Oh, okay. There you go. No, your lighting is great, actually. There is a very sort of soft, warm lighting coming from your direction. So you can bring that vitamin D energy that Ben and I don't have.
Not sure about the energy. I've been down with the flu for the last 2 weeks, but I'll do my best.
Oh, darn. That's too bad. Well, we'll do our best to uplift each other then. So how about we start just with introductions. We first met at Theology Beer Camp and we're a part of an artificial intelligence panel talking AI, theology, philosophy, these sorts of things. And this is kind of our Empire Strikes Back episode where we decided to carry on the conversation, addressing some of the questions and comments that we just simply couldn't get to on the panel. But before we jump into those, how about you share a little bit about who you are and so people feel like they get a sense of who's here. Who wants to start?
I'll go. If this is Empire Strikes Back, that doesn't go great for the good guy rebels until the next movie. So that means the AI might be like coming to get us in this conversation, which is I write about video games and philosophy and theology a lot, so that bad joke's a good segue into that. And I used to run marathons with elite marathon runners, but that kind of like shot my knees over the years. I'd be in the very back, but I could technically qualify with them, like the actual people that win those races, rather than having to raise money for charity to get in. I've been thinking about getting back into it, but I've been doing it by way of like 5-hour walks with a backpack full of books on like secluded forest trails. So that's like a thing I do in my spare time, but I still fit in academic stuff because I've got too many books to read.
Okay. Does that mean you're going to open up some kind of elite academic / marathon running club for academics who want to get in shape? And
if I get back to running, it's going to be short distance. When you ran 60 to 90 miles a week for a certain number of years, your cartilage said bye-bye.
Right. And for the uninitiated, you also teach like philosophy and theology, and you are really into politic and other such things. So yeah, what do you when you're not running with a backpack full of books, where are you teaching?
I'm a senior lecturer of philosophy and religion at Curry College. I just ended my presidency of the North American Politic Society. So yeah, beyond pop culture stuff, kind of philosophical theology, ground of being theology is where I'm at home.
Love it. And Noreen, I remember introducing you when you were part of the AI panel at Theology Beer Camp, and just saying that your biography kind of captures, I think, a bridging of two worlds that doesn't often have a sort of large and reinforced bridge, which is computing science and theology and philosophy. So maybe talk a little bit about what you're up to now, but also your journey towards that, starting in one place and ending up where you are now, because I think that really um, helps frame the conversation that us three are about to have.
Well, I began my career as a computer scientist, got tenured in computer science at St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota. Went off on my first sabbatical thinking that the question that really interested me was why we wanted to create an AGI, why we wanted to make computers like us when I thought they were most useful when they weren't like us, when they did the stuff we couldn't do. Um, and I fell flat on my face because it turned out that was a question not about computers, which was what I was trained in, but about human motivations. And that drew me into studying theology. Um, and I've had a long career at St. John's as the Reuter Professor of Science and Religion, bringing together computer science and theology. But at the moment, I'm now the director of the Benedictine Spirituality and the Environment program, because I think that climate change is the most important question of our time, and I want to end my career tackling that question. As far as a couple of fun facts, most people don't know that I'm also a trained wine judge, and have a little fun with that, although it's not as much fun as people think because you have to spit it out. And I also run a kind of a rest home for abandoned poodles. So if you see a gray head come into the bottom of the picture, that'll be Piper, my latest adoptee.
Okay. Oh, I love that. It's funny. People always apologize and like I've done interviews before where like a dog is in the frame or a cat, and they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I'm like, "No, this is the best. This makes everything so much better," you know. And I think I also mentioned this when I was on when we were part of the panel, but I was like, "Oh, you should definitely talk to Andrew Camp. He's got a great podcast called The Biggest Table, and he loves talking about food and wine." I was actually just on it talking about food and AI, but I bet you would make a wonderful guest on that show because he actually sells wines and is a real foodie, and so I think you two would hit it off for sure. So I'm gonna just publicly say that meeting should happen.
Well,
Um,
food and AI doesn't eat.
well, that's the thing. So this will be a little. We talk about food and the table as a foil to AI.
Ah,
Um, yeah, but the other thing I'll say, just based on your what you shared there, is I totally agree with you on the environment piece. As an ethicist, I often get questions about the divisive ethical, questions floating around these days, and I tell people that it's important we triage. Like,
exactly. Exactly,
like,
and if
you
we
know,
don't if we don't deal with climate change, we're
yeah,
toast.
yeah, right. So when people ask about, gender, sexuality, and marriage, I'm like, hey, look, nobody's getting married if we're all underwater or on fire or can't breathe the air. So, let's focus on taking care of our environment too. So the prospect of marriage, like, is even possible, you know, they don't like it because they want to talk about what they want to talk about. But that's just my cheeky way of saying, like, on the sort of hierarchy of things that are most urgent, this one is very much up there, but it keeps getting kicked down the road.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so let's jump in then to the many questions that we received. So just for a little bit of background, we did some presentations to prepare for Theology Beer Camp, and the idea was that people could watch them in advance and send in their questions and comments, and we talk about them on the panel. And we received, like 30, 40 pages worth of notes and things that we could have talked about. So we couldn't cover them in the panel, and I don't even think we could cover them in this Empire Strikes Back episode. But I did group them into 5 main themes that we can discuss so that we can leave people feeling like we've addressed at least at a meaningful level some of the many responses that we got. So the first one I want us to tackle also represents, I think, a little bit of a difference of opinion between Ben or Noreen, and then I'm kind of playing Switzerland for now, but then I'll probably weigh in at some point. So this is a question around AI, what it means to be human, and based on the way in which we answer the question, what does it mean to be human? What is intelligence? What is consciousness? Is it right or wrong to say that AI has reached a point in which we could describe it as being intelligent, conscious, like the human mind, and so on and so on. So I know that this was something that came up in our discussion, but I know Ben also said that he felt like he wanted to speak a little bit more to that. So how about sort of just right off the top here? I mean, that's kind of the question that often gets asked, and it'd be helpful for people to hear you comment on, is just, is it really intelligent? What is it? That sort of thing. So who wants to jump in first and respond to that very long form question I just posed to you?
I started with introductions, so you go, Noreen.
Okay. Um, well, when you post the questions on email, you started it with, um, you know, if AI is intelligent, what makes us human? And I think it's a mistake to look for, we keep looking for one thing that defines our being human or that makes us human. But it's really a constellation of things. We're bipedal. We've got opposable thumbs. We use tools more than any other animal. Yes, we have intelligence, but we also have emotion. Um, we love each other. I mean, we are a constellation of things. I think that consciousness, I cannot prove this. This is just an intuition of mine. I believe that consciousness is coterminal with life. In other words, I think all living organisms exist on a continuum of consciousness. We're up at one end, my poodles are getting close, but, not quite there. Um, Even plants, we now know, do a lot more communicating with each other than we used to think. I think the rhinoviruses that have currently attacked me are way, way down at the bottom. Um, so I am not sure that computers will ever be conscious. I think in many ways we're attacking it at the wrong end. We're trying to start top down and say if we start with, the highest forms of thinking or of expression, and we give those to computers, that will somehow capture our consciousness. But probably we're better trying to capture consciousness bottom up, um, you know, and we've seen that, I think, already in AI when we started with symbolic AI and tried to capture how we think about complex problems like chess and calculus and stuff, and then realized that those methods didn't transfer at all to facial recognition, locomotion, speech. Now we're capturing some of those things with large language models, but large language models still have the problem that they are only language. They're disconnected from the world as such. Large language models do not have mental models of how the world works the way we do. So again, we're still working at too high a level to try to capture what really makes for consciousness, which ultimately I think is something that evolves when life forms evolve within an evolutionary system. In other words, with each other. Um, and that is something that AI doesn't do. AI is always isolated in the machine.
Right. So there's not that relational component or that embodied component. And of course, an embody set within an environment where all sorts of relationships are set up, that prevents it from reaching the stage of consciousness that you have in view here. I definitely have thoughts about this, but I'm going to hold forth on those and be a good host and give Ben an opportunity to share his thinking on this, because and this was part of your presentation, and we'll make those available, Ben, and Noreen's presentations as well as mine. But you kind of took a different approach in terms of a triadic interpretation of I don't know if the right word would be consciousness, but intelligence. So do you want to lay that out a little bit, Ben, and share your thinking on it?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think I agree with a lot of what Noreen just said. I would use some different terminology and then maybe give AI a little bit more credit and then kind of take it back as soon as I've given it. So it's kind of a sleight of hand. I'm writing a couple chapters for other people's books right now about work in emergence theories and biosemiotics. So the spectrum that I get to, I'm just kind of convinced by this kind of collaborative project between evolutionary biologists and some philosophers, and together you get biosemiotics. Um, to me, the spectrum isn't degrees of consciousness, but unconscious to conscious interpretive activity. So you got the physical level of emergence, then a structural level, and then life emerges. And then the biosemiotics folks say once you have life, you have interpretation, and that can be unconscious interpretation, but they don't think there's any better word for it because you got something like an amoeba and single cell organisms that in a triadic way rather than a dyadic, just action and reaction, interpret certain chemical signatures as harm this way, nourishment that way. And there's interesting work at Tufts University where Michael Levin, his lab is showing that you can actually, again, the language is kind of stretched to a point here, but you either teach or there's some memory even in an amoeba, but they don't have a central nervous system, no brain, but they can be taught or learn or memorize that past this chemical they would normally move away from. There's a greater reward, so they go through it. So there's something like interpreting something in light of something else because it's not doing the normal action and reaction thing. And then there's a spectrum from totally unconscious to sometimes we're conscious and deliberate in our activity, and other times we're less so. But that's my spectrum. And my thing is that AI does kind of perform triadic activities too in the way it interprets a prompt and gives an output. But the way folks in biosemiotics was put it is they're like degenerate or degraded. So they don't do this automatically because they rely on, an AI is not self-creating. So when Noreen was saying like some brief comments about artificial general intelligence, yeah, we're not there with Skynet making new AI robots because it does this at the behest of a person initiating it. So it's got like the markers of life, but it's degenerate life because it's not autopoietic would be the more technical term of self-replicating like a cell is. So I think you could grant it some life status of life, and then you kind of take it back and say it depends on us completely. But I think I like saying that AI is interpretive and thus on a kind of similar playing field with my living spectrum of interpretive activity, because I do think, and again, I think this is not a disagreement with Noreen, but like difference of emphasis. I think AI can shed, so I don't want to locate one thing either. I think one thing that sets us apart also neglects all the similarities we have with all other animals. So I don't want one thing to be the marker of human beings. But I like thinking about what we share with AI because we're also not, again, the difference of emphasis. I think this is agreement, Noreen, but like the top down approach, we emphasize like I'm rational or these things that is intelligence that I have that an AI doesn't have. Ignores the fact that we're not always super rational. There's like some Cartesian thinking like floating around still in the way that people react to AI. And people do lots of things without being able to explain why they did it, and they just kind of did it. People freak out about an AI model talking to another one, and they can't report what the models, like the models can't report what they're talking about. And ooh, that's mysterious. Well, people can't always explain what they did. So if you think of AI as living, it forces you to think about those um, like features that maybe scare people, and then realize we share some of those features too, and we just overemphasize other features.
Yeah, I like what I'm hearing from both of you because I love this view of it's a constellation of attributes or capacities or even just phenomena that comprise the answer to this question, what it means to be human, and that gives us a deep way to talk about ourselves, but also some breadth in terms of seeing similarities between us and non-human creatures or things that humans produce, and maybe just by analogy, but even by analogy that's helpful. um I wonder how much of what we're talking about though is working within an immanent frame, and how much transcendence do we factor into the conversation. And for me, Christological transcendence, but also like uh, presence as well, because the Imago Dei doctrine is, for Christians, key to thinking about what it means to be human. Right? We're created in the image and likeness of God, and so often people would say that is an attribute. Right? Well, God has reason. God has creativity. God has God is what is right morally speaking. Therefore, morality. All these sorts of things. And this is why I worry, because it's what if you don't have that attribute, then what does it mean for you as a human? Does that mean that you're somehow less um, an image bearer, somehow less human than people who have some or all of those attributes? And so that's where I like to take a Christological approach and say with Colossians that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. And what that does is open up all sorts of possibilities in terms of how humans can image this perfect image, right? It is all of those things, but not reducible to any one of those things. And so talking about sort of reasoning from above or below, like there is a transcendent quality to it, but the incarnation makes that immanent. And also thinking about Psalms where it's like, what are people that you're mindful of them, right? You're a little lower than the angels, but you're a little higher than the animals. So we're kind of reasoning from the middle up and down. And this gives us space to say, what is consciousness? It's not created by us. It's not sort of something that emerges spontaneously within this immanent framework that we're all a part of, but it's transcendently given, right? And I realize that probably sounds like, I don't know, classical theism, and or a bit of get out of jail free card or an easy explanation of like, well, we don't actually we can't pin down what consciousness is, so it's like divinely given. But I'm like, I feel like for me, like this is a satisfying answer, but it may not be for others. Like, but I just want to put that out there and say, like, is this satisfying or dissatisfying to either of you? Is to say that like there's not that level of consciousness that AI can reach unless God sees fit to give it. How does what I'm saying land with you two? Do you buy what Michael is putting out here, or you're like, nah, I don't buy it?
I'm not buying it, but I'll give you an alternative of how you would get transcendence.
And would that help explain why you don't buy it?
Yeah, it's just how it would look different. Uh, well, there's one because I mentioned I was president of the Paltilic Society. From a ground of being perspective, it's like, yeah, Jesus was the image of God, but so is everything that has being. This actually sings really well in some traditional ways of like, um, love thy neighbor, but also thy enemy. So everyone we're bombing in Iran is in the image of God, and ISIS soldiers are in the image of God, and like it really, ground of being theology really directly is like God is found in everything, and some stuff that kind of philosophical theologians kind of bristle against that sings real well in churches makes a lot of metaphysical sense if you agree with a ground of being approach. So there's that way of thinking about the image of God. And then in terms of AI and that image, Philip Clayton was at Beer Camp and challenged me to think about this, and I guess he has a point. Um, I still don't entirely know what I'd do with it, but since I agree with biosemiotics and the emergence combination, I have to allow not an image that is in not like it's in us, but a new sort of like what emerges is necessarily new. So it wouldn't be an expected form of intelligence that's like us, but like it would be something that would surprise us, and would be unlike something. So what emerges if AI does achieve something? We can't, like by definition, speak of it now because that level of emergence doesn't exist. That's a counter to people that want to read kind of a human-like consciousness into everything, like panpsychism and panexperientialists. And that explains away the problem because that consciousness in everything, the silicone chips that are running AI could develop it, and then you'd more naturally get, well, that could become artificial general intelligence because it's got consciousness in it.
Yeah.
I think that, so I agree with Noreen that I think that's an impossibility. But some weird quorum of emergence that I necessarily can only theoretically commit to, and then I can't say anything more. I'm thinking more about it, so I don't have more than that. But Philip Clayton was pressing me on that, given my framework.
Noreen,
Okay.
you just unmuted your mic, so
I
permission
did.
to speak freely.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not Talakian. I'm more of a Barth person. But Michael, what you were saying earlier about if we think of the image of God as an attribute, we run into trouble. Whether it's consciousness, there are people in a coma, not very conscious. Whether it's intelligence, well, beginning of life, end of life, you don't see a lot of it. 20th century theologians, pretty much as a body, moved away from thinking of the image as an attribute. You find among the biblical scholars that they looked at concurrent sources to the time the priestly writer was writing Genesis and said its function, they found the image language used where the deputy is the image of the king out in the provinces. So they said, well, he enforces the king's decrees out in the provinces, its function. The systematic theologians went in a different direction and said it's relationship. And so no one person alone possesses the image. the image arises in our relationships with each other and with God. That is certainly Karl Barth's position. Um, so, and it's a position that fits with a Trinitarian view of God, right? Because God then is a relationship, the relationship between the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. So yeah, so I think in many ways we end up putting too many eggs into the intelligence consciousness basket and not enough eggs, for example, into the love basket. That maybe what's important, especially for us as Christians, is not how intelligent we are, but how much love we show to one another, the quality of our relationships, and whether those relationships truly bear the image of God or not.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think for Bart, that relationship finds its fullest expression in the Christological relationship, which, to use, you know, ground of being language, which is kind of like, I don't know, maybe shoehorning a little bit, but that's like the ground and ceiling of all creation, right? Is the one in whom and through whom and all, like, by whom all things are created and held together. And so, like, even when any capacity, even the capacity to love, is lost, there is nevertheless like a Christological giver of creatureliness and human creatureliness and relationship that is never lost. And so just I'm like, I fiercely guard that, because even when there's the inability to do these wonderful things we're talking about, like not just love our family and friends, but our enemy, like even when that's lost and there is the human creature comatose and, one foot on the other side, there nevertheless is something inviolable that persists, right? Hey folks, a quick word before we continue. Personalist Manifestos doesn't run paid advertisements. This show runs on the support of listeners like you. And honestly, we're not quite breaking even just yet. But we believe in what we're doing here, so we keep going. If this show has meant something to you, here's how you can help. Tell a friend about it, leave a review, or consider a small monthly contribution on Substack. I did the math. If everyone listening gave just $1 a month, that would cover our costs for the year. That's it. Less than a cup of coffee. Nobody here is in this for the money. We just want to keep the conversation going without losing money doing it. So if you want to help make that happen, head to Substack and look up Personalist Manifestos. All right, back to the show. And Ben, to go back to your point in terms of panpsychism, I think that's spot on, right? This idea that, it's all present within creation and therefore might spontaneously emerge through technologies, right? Just because it's already there. But if you go with transcendence, it's not already there. There's something from without that holds onto it, holds the keys, as it were. But of course, you're saying that you were being pressed to say, well, neither this transcendence divine approach nor panpsychism, but something unforeseen, and maybe that could be the case, and Michael will be proven wrong here. But what's really interesting, and this factors into some of the other themes and some reading that I've been doing, some conversations I've been having since the panel, is the personality, whether we want to use it in terms of metaphor or actually a literal description that AI seems to be taking on. And I just read a piece that I think you both know him, Paul Horde sent me. He just texted me. He's like, "What do you think about this?" And it was a long piece that was written by the folks at Anthropic, talking about the personality taken on by AI technologies like Claude and the language of assistant, right? So Noreen, you got into the sycophantic nature of artificial intelligence, like ChatGPT and different versions, and there was some that were more sycophantic than others. But there's also kind of this personality that it's taking on, which is it's sycophantic, but it's also quite servile. And of course, that would make total sense that, for technology has so often been created by humans in order to serve the agendas and personalities of humans. So, of course, there's the fear of like, us becoming slaves to AI. But it seems like at this point, a lot of times the personality being taken on is that of a very servile, sycophantic, enabling personality. And how do we make sense of that? Right? How does this gesture towards maybe some of the economic forces at play, political forces at play, social and cultural forces at play? Like what's going on there? I realize this is a very, very, again, long form, question, but what do you make of what I'm saying? Are you seeing these trends too? And does that kind of, uh, say is like, this is the only way that it could go, or is it going this way because there are certain phenomena that's pushing it down this road?
Well, first of all, I mean, I wouldn't I dislike the language of taking on because it almost gives agency to the AI that the AI doesn't have. The AIs are being
Right.
trained by humans, and they are being trained to be servile, to be sycophantic, and it's purely for economic reasons. At some point down the road, every company who's developing this intends to monetize it, and they want customers. They want people to prefer their AI over the competition's AI. Well, how do you do that? You try to make the AI as pleasing to the customer as you can. So it's really part of the capitalistic ecosystem in which these AIs are being developed, that they are being deliberately formed to be servile, to be sycophantic, to perform an empathy that they cannot feel because they don't have bodies, they cannot have emotions, but that the understanding is, well, this is what people will like in the responses that the AI gives. Um, and people, of course, are very quick to anthropomorphize the AI, so they don't realize it's just been trained to say that. It doesn't actually feel anything. It doesn't care about me. Um, but it's all part of the economics within which AI is currently being developed.
I mean, I agree with that completely. I would just say that's an example of what I mean by I can kind of say AI is living in that it's interpretive, but then you have to immediately say, but its status is degenerate because it's not self-replicating like we are and single cell organisms are. That means like any question about AI is actually a question about us kind of temporarily granting it that seemingly living status. So a question about the AI's personality is actually a question about the CEO of the company's personality and what he wants
Mhm.
to get out of the AI. So Noreen's answer is kind of what it means in practice from a more kind of abstract statement. So like, does the AI have this personality? No, the CEO has the personality of wanting you to feel served by the AI so you get in their ecosystem because when they all monetize, Microsoft's AI is not going to get along with the way that OpenAI integrates AI into systems, is not going to talk nicely with Tencent and stuff going on in China. So, they're getting you used to using their products, so you're stuck in their system. Like I've even noticed with experimenting with students, because I'm on my college's AI task force. AIs in the past year have gotten more hesitant to give responses that sound like it's their quote unquote opinion and are like, well, I don't have a stance on this, but here's both sides sort of a thing, trying to like almost some strategic change in the company. Uh, OpenAI specifically, but also Gemini. It seems to be making them even more like less of their seeming like their own autonomous entities and even more servile. So just a further observation about that.
Right, a sort of feigned impartiality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, to create the impression that it's not biased in any way.
Which, of course, is a false impression because AI is quite biased.
Yeah. Yeah. Right, because it's the feigning of it is right to present as reliable,
Well, the
right?
companies have an issue, right? They are making these, they're making these products which do carry all the biases that were in their training set, which are very sycophantic and servile. But as people start becoming aware that AI is biased, sycophantic, and servile, the companies are now saying, oh, we've got to counter this awareness that people have. So while it will still be these three things, it shouldn't look like it's these three things. And that's what I think we're starting to see now.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about the connections between, an increasingly prominent technology and then something that doesn't seem to want to ever go away, which is capitalism.
Mhm.
And this is to make that sort of theme more explicit in the form of a question. Can we envision this technology, like so many others, ending up in a different place? Because preparing for this conversation, I was thinking about this relationship. I'm an Elul scholar, and this is one of Elul's primary points about the emergence of what he calls technique, which is a rational process that prioritizes efficiency for the most sort of return on investment for the least amount of work, and that produces all sorts of technologies in the world. But it's that sole criterion of efficiency that overrides all of our thought processes and therefore starts to shape our actual being in the world. Why that's relevant to this question around capitalism is that he said initially, right, this is Marx pointing out that capital is like the determinative law of his time, and Elul would say that technique emerged in order to expand capital beyond where it was, right? So, if you want to generate capital, you need efficiency. You need techniques and technologies in order to expand it, right, and circulate it. But there was a threshold crossed, he proposes, that says at a certain point technique became the determinative factor, because if you just sort of unplugged all of our technologies, well, there goes the global system of capital that we have. Um, and so this is why it seems to me that it's so difficult to reach a different endpoint other than the one that we seem to be cruising towards is it this sort of technology is good at amplifying, accumulating, binding, producing, right, ever greater efficiency, and that's precisely what capitalism loves. And I'm sounding a little bit pessimistic and determinist here, right? But the question I'm asking is, do either or both of you think that it's possible to to take technologies like this and move it to another possible end? Or is it just you're swimming upstream and you'll never be able to do it?
I think capitalism is, it's not so much efficiency as just amassing money, amassing capital that it's really based on. Um, as I look at AI, I think it could be different. I hope that it will be different. And let me go back to our discussion of the Imago Dei. We talked about how in the 20th century we moved away from thinking it's just an attribute to thinking it could be either a function or a relationship. Right now, with the large language models and generative AI, we're getting stuck in the relationship end because it's been trained on human language, and the idea is that okay, it'll talk to us. It'll be highly relational, and I think that is looking at the wrong image of ourselves to give to the computer, because these are always going to be very unsatisfactory relationships that we have with an AI. We should be looking at function. I mean, we have good AI programs out there like AlphaFold, you know? How do you fold proteins? It looks at how to fold proteins, it figures it out, it does it well. AI can be a wonderful functional tool. Unfortunately, large language models is the wrong way to get there. We need to be looking at restricted AI, you know, where we, for example, people say, well, once we have an AGI, it's going to cure cancer. Well, these large language models, as they're currently designed, are not going to do that because they're designed just on the breadth of human language, not the narrow language of chemistry and biology. You know, so we need to be looking at AI as a functional tool to amplify our abilities, or to do things that we can't, like the rover up on Mars, and to stop looking at it as a carbon copy of ourselves and as an other, a non-human other with whom we can relate, because that non-human other with whom we should relate is God.
Hmm. Just a clarification. My guess is that Ben has some thoughts, but just a clarification. It's the efficiency of technology that makes it so parable with the accumulation imperatives of capitalism. That's a critical distinction that I think is important to make, right? Like it's the power of these technologies and the speed and the reduced output in order to accumulate that makes us addicted to it,
But
right?
ultimately, these technologies are not at all efficient. They're using huge amounts of fossil fuel and water, and so they look efficient, but they're
Yes.
not efficient at all. Now, I
Yes,
gotta let
that's
Ben
yeah.
say something.
No, no, that's great because this was a theme that came up in our panel, and I think it is important, right? It the results appear efficient, right? The speed with which you get, you know, your response or the task performed, but the amount of energy that's consumed is literally draining resources and cooking our planet. So yes, absolutely. So much of the effects of our so-called sterile and efficient technologies are just totally out of view, right? In massive data centers, underground, underwater, all those sorts of things.
Yeah,
But
we
anyway,
think it all
Ben.
happens in the cloud. We don't realize we're only
Wouldn't that be
beginning to
lovely?
realize as people are starting to fight the building of these huge data centers, so big you can see them from space, um, in their backyard, that they're suddenly realizing, "Oh, it's not a cloud," you know? It's very physical.
Yeah.
And that relates to what I was going to add. Nothing really explicitly theological, just that I think the alternative end here is I've read lots of pieces, think pieces, op-eds that are like, if AI is an economic bubble, which it almost certainly is, um, the internet was a bubble, we still have the internet. So AI is a bubble, we're still going to have AI. But I was having a conversation with Taylor Thomas, who's also part of the Tillich Society and was at Beer Camp, not our year for our panel, but the year before. And his point was all of the server farm stuff. The internet does need physical computers networking with each other, but it is not dependent on the massive economic investment and space investment and the additional resources to run these server farms like AI is. So once the bubble bursts and they're not making money, AI could very much, like, very well go away because the server farms are like for nothing then. So like they'll abandon them, sell off the parts back to like people that used to use them, which is PC and like video game enthusiasts, and now all those parts are being, like, RAM prices have skyrocketed and people can't build their own computers for gaming anymore because what used to be a more affordable version of building a PC, doing it yourself, is now super expensive because of AI. Like, it could all just go back to that way because all these companies are going to want to get rid of their server farms rather than paying to make no money off of them. So I think that's a possibility.
Sort of like the music industry and cassettes and records and 8 tracks. Like, but the fear that I have is like, in the meantime, like, how long is it going to take for the bubble to burst, and will we survive until then? Like, I don't know if that sounds alarmist, but like what we're talking about in terms of the strain on our environment, like, how soon do we see this bubble bursting and going back to status quo, and enough time elapsing for it to sort of reemerge as a sort of less hyped mainstream market and more of a boutique thing for the nerds, just in the way that, what wasn't it a couple years ago that for the first time in forever, like vinyl outsold compact discs. But this case, like, the strain on our planet, like, how long, and maybe I'm asking and it's impossible to answer, but how long do we have until, like, we're in serious trouble? I don't know.
We don't have very long,
Mm,
I do believe with Ben that the bubble will burst. I think that companies are going to find that they can't monetize AI the way they want to. The people right now who are, having fun playing with ChatGPT aren't going to have the same kind of fun if it's packed full of ads or if they have to pay what it actually costs to run a query on these things. And it costs a great deal. Like right now, so much of this is being kept afloat with billions of dollars of venture capital. But the venture capitalists at some point are going to say, I'm not seeing any return in this investment.
yeah.
Right now, McKinsey did a survey just about 6 months ago in the fall, and they found that close to 90% of businesses who had tried to rapidly adopt AI were finding no benefit to their bottom line. At what point will the business will just say, well, we're not going to pay for something that is not really benefiting our bottom line? My hope then is that AI will move back to being functional, to
Yeah.
being a tool that's used for, narrow functions, and not something that everyone is supposed to play with because it just won't scale. Now, will that happen before we have done a lot more damage to our planet? Oh God, I hope so. But we'll have to see.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was another thing I was going to say about your comments, Noreen, like more focused uses and less of like just this mass data take, but actually, like, you know, getting a little bit more focused in what we're trying to do, and actually being a little bit more selective in the type of data we're feeding, and actually having data ecosystems that are like curated,
Mhm.
right, and enclosed, and very intentional introduction of data so that you don't actually corrupt the ecosystem, right? I'm speaking
Right.
in metaphorical terms here. That can be immensely useful, right?
Mhm.
So uh I want to shift gears a little bit now and say, so what can we do in light of this, right? So as we wait for this bubble to burst, I was thinking about streaming, right? Like, streaming used to be super affordable and there was no ads, and you can get all these wonderful like shows to straight to your living room for like $5 a month. Well, now prices have raised. Now Amazon has ads unless you pay extra. And I'm like, I'm not paying extra for ads. I'm like, so now we're kind of just back to take cable television, right? But it's like, paying in bits and pieces, right? So I think that's probably where we're going. Is this going to be AI with ads, probably, if we don't, cook the planet, you know, to well done before that starts to happen. Um but where does sort of wisdom and practical action come in, because these it seems to me that there are a lot of people who will see, okay, well, the clock is ticking, let's make as much money as we can, accumulate as much power as we can before the bubble bursts. What can the average person, like, us three in the room and people listening or watching, do if they're feeling like, what, I don't want to just shrug my shoulders, I don't want to take this on wholesale and just kind of ignore the warning signs, I want to do something. What does that look like to you two? What sort of suggestions would you give?
I don't know if this is a bad answer, but I honestly feel conversations like this are doing something because it's not overly negative reactionary stuff that kind of does no good about the reality of, for better or for worse, we have AI, even if it's misunderstood here. So let's not just kind of doom and gloom reactions to it, because we've all also given credit to AI here, and maybe it's not being used in the right way, but we've given it credit. But we're also not the kind of Silicon Valley just basically lies about what it's capable of. So it's not just like the cheerleading that's based on like fan fiction. These conversations in the middle about, like, if you actually understand what it is and what it's good at, and what it's not good at, but it's actually being used for. Um, Shedding a light on that distinction is kind of what Noreen was saying. Um, a lot of the things it can't do are stuff that humans should be doing. So having a conversation about admitting this middle ground, admitting that it's can do some stuff, but there are legitimate concerns, actually allows focus to be placed on, all right, it can do this, it can't do that. What it can't do is actually stuff that humans are good at, the kind of, again, Noreen referenced as, Christians, love, compassion, like things that a personal touch might more be needed for. I think conversations that are actually in the middle do some work, even if it's just sitting around talking, but because it gets more people away from buying the hype or just being overly reactionary to it. I said it
Yeah.
might be a bad answer.
No,
That's a
I don't
great
think that's
answer.
a bad answer at all. I agree with you, Ben. I think we can have those conversations at a variety of levels. Those of us who teach, oh, here comes the poodle.
Oh, hello.
So those of us who teach can talk to our students about whether they should be using AI, what it might be doing to their own development intellectually to be using it. I think those of us who are in parishes can be talking about whether AI makes sense to be used by the parish, and in what ways, both whether it makes sense from a practical standpoint and whether it makes sense from a Christian, a more theological standpoint. Um, I think that we can make a stand ourselves to decide whether we will or will not use this tool. Um, and then I think the third leg that we can do is vote. We can look at our politicians and see which ones care about the planet, care about the climate, care about something other than money, about possibly moving our late stage capitalism in a slightly different direction if we can. And that's probably where we will end up having the biggest effect.
Yeah.
I did
Yeah.
think of one practical like example that beyond having these conversations, there is some power in the people that feel kind of at the whims of these huge corporations, which is, I don't have it in front of me, but there was a Pew study sometime last year, later in the year, um, that if there was an advertisement that was really front facing with, like, we're putting AI in our products, people reported they were 75% less likely to buy the product or less interested in buying it, and I know that freaks out these companies. So that is some real power that you can like Noreen said, you can choose not to use this. That might not sound much to you as an individual, but 75, percent less likely to buy something. Corporations will take note if enough people think that way.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the ways that I am hearing both of you is, let us not outsource to technology, AI or otherwise, the things that actually make us most human. And so relationship, um, uh, and like discomfort, right? Like struggle, strain. Like I don't want to sound like too dramatic here, but actually one of the things that I see more and more within a teaching environment is just how many people come to an educational institution ostensibly to learn, but when they actually experience the discomfort of learning, get grouchy about it. Like, this took too long. Was too hard. It was like I had to look up all these things and I had to do this and I had to write that. And I'm like, you're literally describing learning. That is learning. Like, that is why you're here. That's not something to be put as negative feedback on a course
I've had this
review.
conversation many times.
Like, you're literally paying money to learn. And just for the record, like, none of us get to do what we do without becoming severely uncomfortable. Like, if you want to get uncomfortable, just try to exceed at any discipline, including academics. You're going to run into people that are smarter than you, more accomplished than you. You're going to run into questions that you can't answer immediately. You're going to discover all the books you haven't read that you now have to read now that you know that they exist. And there is struggle to that. There is discomfort to that. But actually, it's worth, sitting in that discomfort that actually leads to joy and growth and transformation. And this is the same with relationships, right? It's like, a wedding day is lovely, hopefully, right? It's beautiful. Everybody's looking their best. Everybody's, just reminiscing about all the loving things, the good memories, right? And the jokes. But it's like marriage, decades later, has lots of those memories, but also a lot of the struggle too. And that's human, right? And I think this reaches its full expression, in a God who chose to become human. And discipleship with that God is also deeply uncomfortable, but also joyful and transformative, as well. And so, like, let's just not outsource that, right? Um, that's kind of what I'm hearing. And just more broadly speaking, I think that's right, Ben. I was reading something the other day about the band The White Stripes, and on one of I think it was their first album. Like, this is well before AI, but they just had this little line in the notes about their album. It said, like, no technologies were used, to, like, all the instruments, all the editing, all of it was done by humans. And all these years later, that line has aged well, and those albums still hold up, right? It's actually not the technological excess that makes an album worth listening to over and over again, but it's actually this funds Noreen's point, right? It's the minimization of factors, right? Reducing it to the essentials, that actually is the most generative for creativity. So maybe the solution is not outsourcing in excess, but actually the reduction of options, maybe the introduction of a little bit of limit and a little bit of discomfort, and we actually might find ourselves at the most, like, full and transformed and joyful and human. And maybe God will show up in that. I don't know. That's what I'm that's what I'm landing on. Does that land well with both of you?
Yeah, of
I
course
think
Jack
that's
White
the
would put a line like that in there. So
Of course he would.
Yeah, I have that same line at the bottom of my syllabus.
Mm,
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful place to end.
yeah.
I ask my students if they really want to save all that time, by not putting in the effort and using AI, what are they going to use that time for? Scrolling on Instagram? And then you have to ask them, does that bring you joy? Is that how you get to the end of your life and you want your epitaph to read, she scrolled a lot on Instagram? You know, I mean, gotta think about it.
Mm. That's a great way. That's a great way to conclude, I think, actually. With all that time gained, what are you going to use it for? Well, thank you, Ben and Noreen. It's always a pleasure to think out loud with you. And I totally agree. Ben, these conversations really matter. That was the other thing I was thinking. How do we demystify and demythologize technologies that are so mystified and mystifying these days? And I think these types of conversations help do that. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And thanks for the work you're doing. Where can people follow you if they want to learn more about your work and keep up to date with all things Ben and Noreen?
well, I've written 2 books. My last name is Chicka. You'll find them. One's called Playing as Others. The other is God the Created. I have a book editing about AI coming out. Probably first thing next year, but there's an AI book in the works. And as part of my work on technology, I realized how social media was negatively impacting me, which was the case for a lot of people. So you can't follow me anywhere, but you can buy my books.
Okay, great.
Nope, pretty much the same for me. You can't follow me anywhere. I don't do social media, and but you can buy my books. And the two that are probably most germane to our topic would be my most recent book, The Artifice of Intelligence, and also In Our Image, Artificial Intelligence and the Human Spirit.
Wonderful. You are both reachable by email, though, yes, in case
Yes.
people want to talk to you about your books? Okay, good.
Yep. It's not
Good.
You can Google me, you'll find a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Articles, email. I have a lot of articles in our school's digital library that you can download for free.
Oh,
I'm
great.
also part of a Vatican group that has been putting out books. We have 2 books out now. One is called Encountering AI, Anthropological and Ethical Issues. And the second one that just came out in January is Reclaiming Human Agency in the Time of AI. And both of those can be downloaded for free. You'll find them on the Journal of Moral Theology website.
Oh, wonderful. All right. All right, thanks for your time, friends. This was great.
Thank you.